It looked human, but it wasn't human at all. "Jack, get back." His voice, though, just a few steps behind me, and I fired 2 shots straight at its face. I am Sergeant Jackie Carter, a member of the Savannah Police Department. This is my 11th year on duty. Throughout my career, I've witnessed all sorts of cases, no matter how strange or frightening they were. But that night, something really happened. 2 years have passed since, but I still remember that moment as the most terrifying day of my life. It was a cold September evening, and I was on patrol with my partner Sam. At around 8:25 p.m., we received a report from the center. The report came from Bonaventure Cemetery, where strange sounds were disturbing people. Sam, as usual, grumbled, "Finally, we get to play some real police work." We set off toward Bonaventure Cemetery. For some reason, there was a heavy and depressive atmosphere that day. As we drove, the weight of that night seemed to darken everything even more. When we arrived at the cemetery, the time was 8:49. The radio was silent, except for the usual static. I parked the patrol car near the entrance. Sam and I grabbed our flashlights and got out of the vehicle. Just then, another announcement came through the radio. "Strange sounds are coming from the cemetery. All nearby units, please proceed immediately." But we were already at the cemetery gates, and we couldn't hear anything. Sam went ahead and I followed. As I stepped inside, my fear and anxiety intensified. Sam looked at me and said, "We need to go deeper in and make sure there's nothing going on." I was walking a step behind, my eyes unable to make anything out in the darkness. All I could hear was the rustling of the wind, and somewhere in the distance, the chirping of a bird. Sam moved a little further, and it was so silent that I could almost hear his breath. I followed him, but my steps were growing heavier, as if my feet were sinking into the earth. Suddenly, Sam stopped. He turned to me and began shining his flashlight around, cautiously scanning the area. Then I heard a whisper very close by. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the tone of the voice was different. It was unsettling and eerie. Slowly, I turned to Sam to get his attention, but when I saw him, his face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Jake, do you hear that too?" he asked. This time the sound was clearer, closer. It was like a scream coming from deep inside the cemetery. Sam swung his flashlight, but the beam wouldn't reach far. It only moved closer to us. Instinctively, we both reached for our guns. "We shouldn't be here in a cemetery," I muttered, though my voice was barely audible. At that moment, a shape appeared in front of us. It looked human, but it wasn't human at all. Its face and eyes were strangely absent, but it was standing there as if it were real. Sam stepped back and in a trembling voice said, "Jack, get back." His voice, though just a few steps behind me, felt as if it came from a distance. Time had lost all meaning since we first entered the cemetery. I began to question if this was all just a dream. Suddenly, I saw the thing move toward me, and I fired 2 shots straight at its face, but it seemed like nothing happened. The sound of the shell casing hitting the ground blended with Sam's voice calling me from behind. I collapsed to the ground, covering my face with my hands. All I could feel was an adrenaline rush, as if my soul was being ripped from my body and something was passing over me. Sam, shortly after, lifted me up with trembling hands and fear in his eyes. The wind scattering leaves all around reached the patrol car, causing its sirens and alarm to blare suddenly. We ran to the car, and I asked Sam to drive. We stopped 500 meters away from the cemetery. Sam grabbed the radio and called for backup. However, the station responded. "Another patrol unit checked the cemetery 5 minutes ago and reported no issues." Sam and I exchanged glances, and our watches both showed 8:55 p.m. The realization that all of this had supposedly happened in just 5 minutes, and the station's response sent chills down our spines. Just as I felt I was losing my grip on reality, I checked my magazine and confirmed that 2 rounds had indeed been fired. Sam and I stared at each other in shock. We wanted to leave this place as quickly as possible, but the car wouldn't start this time. Just then we heard a voice. "Help me, I'm here." It was unmistakably a child's voice. We got out of the car and pointed our flashlights in the direction of the sound. Then another voice followed. "Dad, I'm here, come here." I froze in place because I recognized the voice. It was Chris, Sam's son, who had died in the accident. Sam immediately tried to run back into the cemetery, but I stopped him and said, "Partner, get a grip. Whatever is out there, it's not your child. It's trying to lure us back into the cemetery. We need to call for help right now." But Sam didn't listen. "I need to see this with my own eyes," he said, and ran into the cemetery. I had no choice but to follow him to keep him safe. The voice kept calling out, "Dad, I'm here. Come here," drawing us deeper into the cemetery than we had gone before. Then all of a sudden, the voice stopped. Flashlights in hand, we scanned the area. In the faint light, I spotted 2 headstones between the trees. I signaled to Sam, and we cautiously approached them. As the light fell on the inscriptions, my blood ran cold. These were our names on the gravestones, and the dates indicated that we would die in exactly 1 week. The graves were dug very deep. Just then, a man called out to us from behind. Instinctively, we pointed our guns at him. The man raised his hands and introduced himself as the cemetery caretaker. I saw the police car and thought there might be a problem here. After wandering around a bit, I saw the light and came this way, he said, slowly lowering his hands and approaching us. I asked him when these graves had been dug. His response was, "If any graves are dug here, I'm always informed. The last burial here was 3 to 4 months ago. People don't really want to bury their relatives in a place like this anymore. Must be the bad reputation of the cemetery." When I asked what kind of bad reputation, he explained, "Sometimes people claim to hear strange noises and see moving shadows around here. I spend 4 to 5 hours of my shift here every night, but I've never encountered any of those things. I guess these things choose who they want to show themselves to," he added jokingly. When I showed him the gravestones with my and my partner's names on them, his face turned serious. Sam, meanwhile, sat silently, trying to process everything that had happened. The voice of the child had shattered him completely. We helped Sam to his feet and started heading back to the car with the caretaker. I told him I'd get back in touch with him later, and we got into the car. This time, the vehicle started without any issues. Amid everything that had happened, we were no longer surprised by anything. The next day, as soon as our shift ended, Sam and I headed straight to the cemetery. When I entered through the gates, I found the 2 casings from the shots I had fired the night before. We went deeper into the cemetery to locate the place where we had seen the gravestones the previous night, but there were no gravestones, no signs of graves, nothing. The soil hadn't even been disturbed. As we were leaving the cemetery, I saw a few people and asked them how I could find the caretaker. And that's when another mystery presented itself. One man replied, "There hasn't been a caretaker here in a long time. People are too scared to come into this cemetery. So for months, no one's seen anyone working here. Not during the day or at night." It only deepened the confusion. What had happened to us that night? Was our presence there a coincidence, or had we been chosen? Did those things really happen, or was it all a dream? The caretaker, the gravestones, the patrol vehicle, supposedly in the cemetery at the same time as us, but which we never saw. How had all of this unfolded? What did it all mean? Until the date on the gravestone arrived, I lived like a man waiting for his death every single day. I barely managed to sleep, relying on sleeping pills. 2 years have passed since those events, yet Sam and I are still no closer to understanding their meaning.